everyone. Today we are talking about solving quadratic equation by factoring, and that's called the zero product property. That is going to be a little bit different than what we have learned before. Notice when we are solving quadratic equation, you have to have an equal sign, and if you don't have an equal sign, you don't have to solve it. That's just either factoring or pull out the GCF. So because you have a zero right here, please understand that z equal to zero is one of the most important thing in solving. Okay, so once we decide there's an equal to zero, that means we need to take care of all the other side. And so when you have a zero product property, something has to equal to zero. Now, if you notice, there's nothing else, as the first problem shows you, there's nothing else, and it's already in factor form. Again, factor forms, everything's in parentheses, or they are multiplying. Once that is parentheses x plus 2 times parentheses x minus 3. And you can solve the equation by using zero product property. And what that means, if you have a 0 times whatever in the back, you don't care. As long as you have 1 0, it's a 0. And same thing, if you have a 0 in the back, which is making this guy equal 0, and I don't care x plus 2, what that is going to be, it doesn't make any difference. So in this case, our goal is to make sure that whatever the number can make the first parenthesis equal 0, or the second parenthesis equals 0. So to do that, what we're going to do is really basic. We're going to say, hey, x plus 2 is going to equal to 0, and x minus 3 equal to 0. We are trying to make sure or forced to find out what is the number that makes the first parenthesis equal 0 and second parenthesis equal 0. As long as one of them equals 0, we have zero product property, because everything times a 0 is a 0. So to solve, I call it my little tiny equation. To solve that, you just minus 2 on both sides. For the first part, x equals negative 2. And then plus 3 on both sides for the second equation. And that's x equals 3. And because by doing that, if you double check, if you put in negative 2 for the first equation right here, negative 2 put in the x plus 2, that will make that equal 0. And then if you put in the second one, which is x minus 3, so if you put in a 3, that will also equal to 0, and therefore we reach our requirement. So because of that, the answer is just negative 2 and 3, and that's how you solve a zero product property. This is the first way to solve quadratic. The keyword you need to remember, using zero product property after you factor it. Okay, make sure you check for factoring zero product property, and it has equals 0. So for second question, we are also going to double check, do I have everything in multiplication form? Yes, because that's really y times parentheses 3y plus 4. So because of that, I know I already got my factoring already. So that's y equals 0, 3y plus 4 equals 0. Okay, and then since y equals 0, that's the first answer, that's done. And the second one is just going to be minus 4 on both sides. Those are my little baby equations. And that's your zero product property working, equals negative 4, and divide by 3 on both sides. Your y equals negative 4 and negative 4 over 3. So now you'll have two answers. One of them is y equals 0. The other one is y equals negative 4 over 3. Going on to the next problem, you have the parentheses square, and technically you can write it as 5x minus 4 times 5x plus 4 minus 4. Because that's a square right here, therefore we just have to write it twice. Now you can ask, technically you can really just solve one and be done. So that's 5x minus 4 equals 0 plus 4 on both sides, you'll have 5x equals 4. And divide by 5 on both sides, x is just equal to 4 over 5. And that will be your answer for number 3. And then number 4 is the same thing like number 2. The only difference is the number 2 have just one letter in the front, and then we have for number 4 we have the number and the letter, and there's not that big of a difference. It's the same exact thing. So you set everything on the outside right here by itself into equal to 0, so that's going to be 5x equals 0, and then the next one in parentheses equal to 0, just going to be 3x minus 2 equals 0. And you solve it, you divide by 5 on both sides, and then x just equal to 0. And if you add 2 on both sides, you'll have 3x equals 2. Divide by 3 on both sides, x is going to be 2 over 3. And that will be your answer. One of them is going to be 0, and the other one, x equals 0. The other one is x equals 2 over 3. For example, number 5, that same type of question is number 4. And to do that, pretty much you can just make sure that double check they are all multiplying. And because they are all multiplying, I can pretty much just set them equal to little baby equation with this 0 product property. So that's just going to be t equals 0, 4t minus 3 equals 0, and 6t plus 1 equals 0. And you solve your little equations. First one is t equals 0 already, so we don't have to worry about it. Second one is plus 3 on both sides, and just solve 4t equals 3. And divide by 4 on both sides, t equals 3 over 4. Then the next one is minus 1 on both sides. You have 6t equals negative 1. Divide by 6 on both sides, t equals negative 1 over 6. And therefore, those are your answers. T equals 0, t equals 3 over 4, and t equals negative 1 over 6. So those are the very basic ones that you can just set it up, because they are all factored for you, and you just have to take them where they are dividing, you set them equal to 0. Now we are moving on to the next type. The next type is they have not put it in parentheses for you. So therefore, you have to make sure that you put it in the parentheses. And in this case, it's the guess and check that we did before in the previous section in lesson 7. Notice there's an equal sign, so we need to factor it and solve it. So to do that, going back to what we done, is going to be 1 and 2 for 2. You have a 1 and 5. And then since I need the 9 in the middle, you have a 1 and 2. And if you flip it, 5 and 1, that will actually give you 10. That will give you 1. And since we need positive 9, so the 10 has to be 0. 10 has to be positive, and 1 has to be negative. So therefore, that's going to give me 9. So double check. This number is going to be equal to that. And then the next part we had to double check is going to be negative 5 and negative 1 multiply, that give you negative 5. So because we done all the checking and they are correct, what we're going to do, the answer for that is going to be x plus 5 and then 2x minus 1. And when you finish writing it, you can draw this if it makes you feel better, so you don't get confused. You need to set your little baby equation. And your little baby equation is going to be x plus 5 equals 0. And then 2x minus 1 equals 0. And then what you do is you do minus 5 on both sides for 1. X equals negative 5. Solve it separately. And second one is going to be plus 1 on both sides. And divide by 2x. And divide by, you're left with 2x. And then you divide by 2. Then x equals 1 over 2. Now after you do that, you will have the answer that x equals negative 5 and x equals 1/2. Going on to the next one, Please try it. You need to factor and solve it. For number 7, the answer is -2/3 and x equals -1/4. So as the problem previous from before, what I did is I take the 12 and I factor 1 and 1. I'm sorry, that should be 1 and 12. And then 2 and 6 and 3 and 4. That gives me the 12. And then I have 1 and 2 for the 2. So what I have is I line up my 12 is 3 and 4 and 2 and 1. That will give me the 11 because 4 times 2 is 8. 3 times 1 is 3. 8 plus 3 gives you 11, and that will match up the 11 in the middle. And then I have the 2. 2 times 1 is 2. And to write my factors is sideways. So it's going to be 3x. Sorry, it's actually 3y. Plus 2 and 4y plus 1. And then I need to move all those is y. So that should be a y too. So that's going to be 3y plus 2 and minus 2 on both sides. That will be 3y. And that will be y equals 2/3. And that is the first one. And then the next one should be y right here also. And that is going to be 4y plus 1 equals 0 and minus 1 on both sides. And then divide by 4. Your y is going to be, the second one, is going to be equal to -1/4. And that's how you do number 7. And the number 8 is a little bit different. Number 8, if you look at it, you should notice they have x in common. You got to make sure you double check what is my GCF, which is what things they have in common. So I need to pull out x. And then that becomes x squared minus 3x minus 10 equals 0. And now we are going to factor 1 and 1, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. So now I need a 3 in the middle. So it's definitely 1 and 1, 2 and 3. Because you cannot have 1 and 10 and give you 3. Oh, 2 and 5. So when you have 2 and 5, what you're going to do is you also need to decide, I have to have a -3. So because it's -3, I need to have a -5. So that will give me the -3. And the answer, and I also checked that my 2 times -5 gives me -10. And I have a -3 here and -3. So now I'm all set to write my answer. If you want to draw that, to double check you got everything correct. You have x plus 2 and x minus 5. And then when you solve it, that will be your little baby equation. X plus 2 equals 0. X minus 5 equals 0. So minus 2 on both sides. X equals -2. And plus 5 on both sides. For the second equation, x equals 5. And that is how you do number 8. So now, let's make sure we understand. We always have to check for GCF. And you say, but Ms. Wiesman, what happened to the x? Well, that x definitely has to come down. So therefore, you also should put down x right in the front. So you have the third equation, x equals 0. So please, please, please do not forget. And also, another thing that's very interesting is if you take a look at your exponent, and your highest exponent is x to the third. Because that's x to the third, you should have 3 answers. Notice if you have x to the second power right here, you have 2 answers. And then if you look at right here, that's really t times t times t for number 5. T right here times t times t. Since there's t to the third power, I have 3 answers. So that's maybe a little hint that will be helpful for you guys to figure out how many answers you're going to have. Try number 9 yourself. Number 9, you need to make sure that you put out things they have in common first. And number 10, make sure you move everything to one side so you'll have one side equal to 0. So please try number 9 and number 10. So for example number 9, here's the work I have. Because they have 4x in common. For number 9, because they have 4x in common, I pull out the 4x. I left with 3x squared plus 5x minus 2. Then I know 3 can be, I'm going to double check, can I factor by guessing. So 1 and 3, 1 and 2 actually will give me the same exact number. And then if I flip it over, 3 times 2 equals 6. 1 times negative 1 gives you negative 1. And then 6 minus negative 1 gives you 5, which is right here. Then 2 times negative 1 gives you negative 2, that's also correct. So to write the answer, I have to bring down the 4x. Then that's x plus 2 times 3x minus 1. And because they are multiplication already, I'm going to set 4x equals 0, 0 product property. And I have x minus 2 equals 0. That's another baby equation. Then I have 3x minus 1, that's equals 0. That's another equation. So the answer for that is going to be 0, negative 2, 1 over 3 after you solve it. For number 10, you have to make sure one side equal to 0. So I'm moving the 4. I'm moving the negative 28y. By doing that, I will have 6y squared minus 5y minus 4 equals negative 28y. And I'm moving it again because one side has to equal 0. So plus 28y plus 28y, I line them up. One side now equal to 0. And once you have one side equals 0, you have the rest of the problem. You can break it down and guess and check. So the way after I wrote down the numbers, I noticed 6 times 4 is 24, and there's a possibility. So I'm going to put down 1 and 6, and 6 times 4 is 24. 1 times 1 is going to be 1. And I notice if I get negative 1, that means I also should have a negative right here. And that would be positive 23. And then so therefore the 23 matches up with the middle term right here, positive. And then if you have the negative 1 times the negative times 4 gives you negative 4. So those are match up. And then because of that, I can write my answer sideways. And in this case, will be x plus 4. And then 6y minus 1. And that's why I have 6y minus 1. And now I need to fix it right here. That's minus. And so then you do plus 1 on both sides. And once you do that, you're going to have 1 over 6. And there's the set of answers right here. And those are the answers for number 10. So let's take a look at number 11 together. Number 11, you have just 2 terms. But before we do anything else, we need to make sure we can pull out things they have in common. So in this case, that's going to be just what is my GCF. So please, 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 when you look at your quiz, make sure you find your GCF first. So if you pull out t, that will be t minus 4. That's equal to 0. And that would be t times t minus 4. You are already factoring both places. So just t equals 0. t minus 4 equals 0, and plus 4 on both sides, you have t equals 4. And your answer will be t equals 0, t equals negative 4. Then the next one, we are doing the same thing. Pull out things they have in common, so please try it. So for example 12, I notice there's 2, both are even, so I know that it's going to be 2 in common. But I also notice the smallest n exponent is 2, so I pull out the 2. So that's what I have, 2n squared. And once I do that, I know I have 5n minus 3 left. And because this is a factoring, I need to write it in multiplication form. So that's going to be 2n squared right here, minus times 5n minus 3, which is on the bottom, equal to 0. Then if you cancel everything, then since one side equals 0, you can set it in 2 equations. And those baby equations will have 2n squared equals 0, divide by 2, and square root n squared. That will give you square root of 0. That's going to be 0. And then the other one is 5n minus 3 equals 0. If you add 3 both sides and divide by 5, that gives you n equals 3 over 5. And therefore, that is going to be your answer. Now you say, Ms. Wiesman, but they have 3 answers because the exponent is 3. The reason it's not going to be a big deal is because right here, the n is second power. So therefore, n squared is going to be 0. That takes care of 2 answers. And then 5n minus 3 is the second answer. So that is why it's not going to be any problem with 1 solutions right there. So that concludes today's notes for zero product property, solving quadratic equation by factoring. Okay, so zero product property, one more time, one side has to equal 0. Everything have to be factored, write it in multiplication form, and setting every single term that's in multiplication equal to 0 and solve it. So in this case, it depends on the situation. You might have 2, you might have 3 answers. And don't forget to check your GCF all the time first. And that concludes today's notes. Thank you so much for watching.